My son chose his wife's birthday party over his own mother's funeral. The very next day, he walked into my home not with an apology, but with a contract and a pen, asking for everything his mother and I had ever built. He thought he saw a grieving old man lost in his memories and ready to be managed. He had no idea he was looking at the man who was about to give him the only inheritance he truly deserved. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And please hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to draw a line in the sand and stand up for what is right. The silence in the chapel was wrong. It wasn't the respectful, solemn quiet of mourning. It was the hollow, echoing silence of absence. I stood near the front, my hands clasped behind my back, the way I always do when I need to feel anchored. The air smelled of wilting lilies and lemon-scented wood polish, a sterile scent trying to cover a profound emptiness. David Chen, my lawyer, and a friend of 40 years stood a few pews back, his presence a small, solid comfort in the vast emptiness. Besides him, there were only a handful of Clara's oldest friends, their faces etched with a shared quiet grief. I looked at the third pew on the right. It was empty, a glaring, unforgivable void. That was where my son Kevin and his wife Tiffany were supposed to be. I had saved the seats for them, a foolish act of a father's hope that I now regretted. This was the final service for his mother, the woman who had spent sleepless nights by his crib, the woman who had beamed with pride at his college graduation, the woman who had loved him unconditionally even when he made it so difficult. And the pew was empty. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a low, intrusive vibration that felt like a violation in this sacred space. I knew who it was. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it be, but another part, a colder, more methodical part, needed to see the words. I pulled the phone from my pocket, the screen's bright artificial light looking obscene in the dim chapel. A single text message from Kevin. Dad, I'm so sorry. We can't make it. Tiffany's 40th birthday bash is tonight. Everything is paid for hundreds of guests. We can't cancel. It's a huge networking opportunity for my new project. You understand. We'll stop by tomorrow. I read the message once, then twice. Each word was a small, sharp stone hitting a window that was already cracked. You understand. The two words that were meant to absolve him of all responsibility. He wasn't asking for my understanding. He was telling me it was expected. He was framing his profound disrespect as a practical, logical business decision. I didn't reply. My thumb hovered over the screen, steady as a surgeon's hand. My mind flashed back to a different room just 6 months ago, a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Clara's hand, frail and cool, was in mine. Kevin stood on the other side of the bed, his face a mask of practiced concern. He had looked at his mother, his voice smooth and reassuring, and said, "Don't you worry about a thing, Mom. I'll always be there for Dad. I'll take care of everything." A promise made to a dying woman. A promise that had evaporated into a text message about a birthday party and a networking opportunity. The memory faded, leaving the cold reality fell of the glowing screen in my hand. I didn't delete the message. I took a screenshot, the small click echoing in the silence of my mind. Then I put the phone back in my pocket. The silence in the chapel was no longer just empty. It was charged. It was the silence of a decision being made. Returning to the house was the hardest part. Every object, every shadow screamed Clara's absence. The front door, which she always insisted on painting a cheerful shade of blue, now seemed muted and gray. I stepped inside and was met with the scent of her, a faint mix of lavender and baking spices that still clung to the air. It was a ghost of a scent, a memory my mind refused to let go of. The house was too big, now its silence even more profound than the chapel's. I walked through the living room, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the hardwood floors. There was her favorite armchair by the window, a book lying face down on the side table marking a page she would never read. In a basket beside it, her knitting needles rested in a half-finished scarf of soft gray wool, small monuments to an unfinished life. I walked into my study, which had always been our shared space. My side was all ledgers and financial journals. Her side was a creative chaos of sketchbooks, gardening magazines, and photo albums. My gaze fell upon the mantelpiece above the fireplace. It was lined with photographs, a timeline of our life together. Our wedding. Kevin's first steps. Family vacations at the lake. And then the most recent addition, a large silver-framed photo from Kevin and Tiffany's wedding 10 years ago. In it, Kevin was beaming, his arm wrapped tightly around his new wife. Tiffany was radiant in white, her smile wide and perfect. I stood beside them, Clara on my other arm, her smile a little weaker than I remembered, a hint of the illness that was already taking root. Looking at that photo, a cold clarity washed over me. This betrayal, this final act of disrespect, wasn't a sudden event. It was the destination of a journey we had been on for years. It was 1,000 small cuts that had finally severed the bond. The Christmases Kevin and Tiffany had skipped because they had to fly to some exotic resort. The birthdays of Clara's they had forgotten, only to send a generic gift card a week later. The phone calls that always felt rushed, filled with talk of his latest business deal, with barely a question about his mother's health. I had made excuses for them for years. He's busy building his career, I would tell Clara. He has his own family to think about, I would tell myself. I had been a willing participant in my own deception, painting over the cracks in our family to maintain a fragile peace. Today, that painting had been stripped away, revealing the rot underneath. The man in that photograph was not the son I had raised. He was a stranger wearing my son's face. I took my phone out. Again looked at the screenshot of his text message and saved it to a new password-protected folder on my phone. A folder I labeled simply Evidence. A plan still hazy at the edges was beginning to sharpen in my mind. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but now it was joined by something else. A cold, quiet resolve. Later that evening, long after the sun had set, I sat in the dark of the study and dialed a number I knew by heart. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. David Chen. David, it's Richard. Richard. His voice softened immediately. I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up? Please, if there is anything at all I can do. I'm all right, David, I said, and the calmness in my own voice surprised me. It was a detached, unnerving calm, the voice of a man who had moved past the initial storm of emotion and into the clear, cold air of purpose. I'm calling for a reason. I need you to do something for me. There was a slight pause on the other end. Of course, Richard. Anything. I need you to pull the original deeds for my house. I also need you to review my will and Clara's. I want to see every document related to our assets. Everything. I'll be at your office first thing in the morning, 9 a.m. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a few seconds. I could almost hear David processing the request, the urgency, the strange lack of emotion in my tone. It was not the request of a man lost in grief. It was the request of a man preparing for a fight. Richard, is everything okay? What is this about? He finally asked, his voice laced with genuine concern. I looked at the silver-framed photograph on the mantel, at the smiling faces that now looked like masks. I just want to make sure everything is protected, David. I said, my voice even and measured. I want to ensure everything is handled exactly as Clara would have wanted. The words were true, but not in the way David would understand them. He saw a grieving husband trying to put his affairs in order. I knew it was the first move in a game my son didn't even know we were playing. The game had started the moment he chose a party over his mother. And I, the quiet accountant, who had spent a lifetime balancing the books, was about to balance one final crucial account. The doorbell rang the next morning. The sound was a violent intrusion tearing through the quiet fabric of the grieving house. For a moment I considered not answering. The silence had become a kind of shield, and I was not ready to let the world back in. But I knew who it was. My son had promised he would stop by, and if nothing else, Kevin was a man of his schedule, if not his word. I walked to the door, my steps measured, and opened it. They stood on the porch, framed by the morning sun, like a portrait of modern success. Kevin was dressed in a crisp, dark blue suit, his hair perfectly styled. He looked like he had just stepped out of a boardroom, not come to offer condolences. Tiffany stood beside him wearing a cream-colored cashmere tracksuit that probably cost more than my first car. In Kevin's hand was not a bouquet of flowers or a baked casserole, but a sleek black leather portfolio held with the same casual importance a knight might hold a shield. It was the first thing I noticed, and it told me everything I needed to know. "Dad," Kevin said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. He stepped forward for an awkward one-armed hug, patting my back twice. It was a gesture of obligation, not affection. Tiffany offered a thin smile and an air kiss that landed a few inches from my cheek. "Richard," she said, her eyes scanning the foyer as if assessing its market value. "We are so sorry about yesterday. It was just unavoidable." I said nothing. I simply stepped back and held the door open for them, a silent invitation into the house they had so easily abandoned the day before. They walked in, bringing with them the scent of expensive cologne and a restless, frantic energy that didn't belong here. I led them to the living room, the room where Clara had spent her final days, surrounded by the things she loved. Kevin sat on the edge of the sofa, placing the leather portfolio on the coffee table with a soft, definitive thud. Tiffany remained standing, running a manicured finger along the dusty surface of the mantelpiece. "The party was a smashing success," she announced to no one in particular. "An absolute triumph. We had investors fly in from Chicago, can you believe it? Senator Thompson's wife was there, and she just adored my dress. She said it was a shame you couldn't be there." I watched her, a ghost of a woman in a house full of memories, talking about dresses and senators. I listened to Kevin as he launched into a justification for his absence, peppering his speech with words like synergy and opportunity cost and critical timeline. He spoke as if he were addressing a shareholder, not his father, the day after his mother's funeral. He avoided my eyes, his gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder. They were performing a scene, reciting lines from a script they had written in the car on the way over. A script about a successful, busy couple who were regretfully but necessarily absent. And my role in their script was to be the understanding, slightly senile old man who would nod and forgive. I did not play my part. I remained silent, a quiet observer to their hollow performance. I watched the way Kevin's expensive watch glinted under the lamplight, the way he tapped his foot impatiently on the Persian rug Clara had cherished. I was no longer a father listening to his son. I was an accountant gathering data, noting every discrepancy between their words and their actions. The audit had begun. Finally, their rehearsed apologies petered out, leaving a thick, uncomfortable silence in their wake. I rose from my chair. "Can I get you some coffee?" I asked, my voice even. The simple domestic question seemed to catch them off guard. Kevin's face brightened, mistaking my civility for forgiveness. "That would be great, Dad. Thanks." He leaned forward, his hands resting on the leather portfolio. "Actually," he said, his voice shifting into a smoother, more persuasive gear, "while you do that, there's something I'd like to show you. Something I'm very excited about." He unzipped the portfolio and spread its contents across the coffee table. Glossy architectural renderings, colorful charts, and pages of dense financial projections covered the polished wood surface. It was a proposal for a luxury condominium development, a sleek glass and steel tower that promised panoramic city views and an infinity pool on the roof. He launched into his pitch, his voice filled with a salesman's passion. He spoke of legacy, of building something that would last, of securing his family's future. He was a good performer, I had to give him that. He was animated, confident, and utterly convincing. I stood there for a long moment watching him. He wasn't just selling a building. He was selling a version of himself he desperately wanted to be true. The successful developer, the visionary, the good son securing his father's future. But I saw through the performance. I saw the desperation in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hand as he pointed to a spreadsheet. Then he delivered the reason for his visit. "Dad, I know the timing is difficult," he said, finally looking me in the eye. "But an opportunity like this, it's once in a lifetime. The investors are ready to go. The only thing holding us back is the initial capital." He paused, taking a deep breath, before delivering the final blow. "I've already had the house appraised," he said, gesturing around the room, not at our home, but at a financial asset. "And I've got a cash buyer lined up, a fantastic offer way above market value. All we need is your signature on the purchase agreement." He slid a thick document out from the pile. A contract. My eyes scanned the words. Purchase agreement, property address, seller, buyer. It was all there, neat and clinical. "You don't need all this space anyway," he continued, his voice softening into a tone of feigned concern. "Think of the upkeep, the taxes. It's a burden. We've found a wonderful luxury assisted living community for you just a few miles from us. Top of the line. It's got a golf simulator, a movie theater. You'd be so much more comfortable." He was trying to erase me, to erase her. He was offering to trade this house, this living archive of our family's history, for a cash offer and a room with a golf simulator. As he spoke, I wasn't listening to his words anymore. I was looking at the small scuff mark on the hardwood floor, the one left by a 5-year-old Kevin crashing his first tricycle. I was looking at the pencil marks on the doorframe to the kitchen, a faint ladder showing his height at every birthday. I could almost smell the scent of Clara's rose garden drifting in through the window, the one she had tended with such care for 40 years. This house wasn't just wood and nails. It was a vessel of memory. It was the only tangible piece of Clara I had left. And my son was asking me to sell it to fund his glass tower. He was asking me to liquidate his mother's memory. I let my eyes fall from my son's expectant face down to the contract on the table. The paper was thick and expensive, the text printed in a crisp, merciless font. Purchase agreement. Legal descriptions, clauses, and signature lines. It was a document designed to end a story, not to honor one. My hand, which Kevin expected to reach for the pen, remained resting on the arm of my chair. Instead, my gaze lifted and began a slow journey around the room. It was a strange thing. I wasn't just looking at furniture and walls. The present seemed to thin, becoming translucent, and through it I could see the ghosts of the past, vibrant and alive. My eyes settled on the grand fireplace, its brickwork dark with age. But I didn't see the cold hearth of today. I saw a 5-year-old Kevin, his face illuminated by the glow of a crackling fire on Christmas morning, his eyes wide with wonder as he unwrapped a simple wooden train set. He was so small, his laughter filling the entire house, a sound so pure it felt like it could last forever. Where did that little boy go? When did his laughter curdle into the smooth, calculated cadence of a salesman? My gaze drifted to the large bay window that overlooked the backyard. For a heartbeat, the cloudy morning outside vanished. In its place was a sun-drenched afternoon in July. Clara was there, 20 years younger, wearing her wide-brimmed straw hat. Her hands were covered in dirt as she knelt among her rose bushes, carefully tending to the blooms that were her pride and joy. She looked up, sensing me watching from the window, and gave me a smile so radiant it could have powered the entire city. She was the soul of this home, and her spirit was still woven into the very light that filled the room. Kevin wasn't just asking me to sell lumber and plaster. He was asking me to sell that smile. He was asking me to put a price tag on the sunlight in her hair. Finally, I looked toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. My eyes found the doorframe, and I could just make out the faint horizontal pencil marks, a ladder of memories charting Kevin's growth from a toddler to a young man who towered over his mother. Each mark was a celebration, a moment frozen in time. This house wasn't an asset. It was a living ledger of our lives, of our joys and our sorrows. It was the only history book of our family that mattered. I brought my focus back to the present. Back to my son and his wife, their faces wearing thin masks of patience. I let the silence sit for a moment longer before I spoke, my voice quieter than I expected, but steady. Your mother, I began, my eyes meeting Kevin's. She worked the night shift at the diner on the other side of town for 5 straight years. Do you remember that? Kevin shifted uncomfortably. Dad, what does that have to do with anything? Everything, I said. She came home every morning smelling of fried onions and stale coffee, so tired she could barely climb the stairs. She did that, Kevin, for 5 years, so that we could save up enough money for the down payment on this place. When we finally signed the papers, she didn't say she was excited to own a house. She said she was excited to finally have a kitchen window with a view of a garden where she could plant her roses. I looked from Kevin to the contract on the table. She didn't buy a property. She bought a life. She bought this life. For all of us. A flicker of something, shame perhaps, or just annoyance crossed Kevin's face before it was replaced by a look of weary condescension. Dad, come on, he said, shaking his head as if dealing with a stubborn child. Don't do this. Don't get sentimental and live in the past. I respect what you and Mom built, I really do. But that was then. This is about the future now. It's about my family's future. The emphasis on the word my was a small, sharp twist of a knife. The past was a shared sacrifice, but the future in his eyes was his alone. Tiffany, sensing an opening, stepped forward and placed a hand on my arm. Her touch was light and cool. He's right, Richard, she said, her voice syrupy and smooth. Think of it this way. We're trying to help you. With the money from the sale, we can ensure you have the absolute best care. No more worrying about a leaky roof in the winter or paying those high property taxes. This is about giving you a comfortable, secure, stress-free life. It's what Clara would have wanted for you. They thought they were being so clever. One played the pragmatist, the other played the caregiver. They had all the angles covered. They saw a grieving, sentimental old man who needed to be managed for his own good. They couldn't see the accountant behind my eyes, the man who was calmly calculating the true cost of their proposal. And it had nothing to do with money. I looked down at the documents again, at the glossy renderings of a building that had no soul. I neatly stacked the pages back into a single pile, my movements slow and deliberate. I tapped the edge of the stack on the table, straightening them into a perfect block. I did not shove them or tear them. I treated them with the same impersonal respect I would give any other business document. Then I picked them up. I hear what you're both saying, I said, my voice betraying no emotion. Kevin and Tiffany exchanged a quick, triumphant glance. They thought they had won. But this, I continued, holding the portfolio, is a significant legal and financial document. It involves an asset I have spent 40 years paying for. You'll understand that I'm going to need to have my lawyer David Chen review these papers thoroughly before I even consider signing anything. I placed the portfolio on the side table next to my chair, a clear signal that the discussion was over. The confident smiles on their faces faltered for just a second. A flicker of annoyance in Kevin's eyes, a tightening in Tiffany's jaw. This wasn't part of their script. They had expected an argument they could win or an emotional surrender they could exploit. They had not expected this calm procedural roadblock, but their confidence returned almost instantly. To them, this was just a small delay, a formality. A stubborn old man wanting to feel important. They would get their signature eventually. They smiled again reassuringly. They had no idea they were smiling at the man who had just led them into the first room of a carefully constructed trap. David Chen's office was a sanctuary of order. The walls were lined with shelves of leather-bound law books, their gold lettering glinting in the soft lamplight. The room smelled of old paper leather and freshly brewed coffee. It was a world away from the emotional chaos of my own home, a place where logic and precedent reigned supreme. I sat in a heavy leather chair opposite his large oak desk, the silence broken only by the rustle of paper as David meticulously reviewed the contract my son had given me. I had placed the sleek portfolio on his desk 10 minutes earlier, and since then he had not spoken a word. He read with a lawyer's intense focus, his pen occasionally making a sharp, decisive note in the margins. Finally, he set the last page down and slowly removed his reading glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, his expression a mixture of professional outrage and personal concern. He looked at me, his old friend, and his gaze was serious. "Richard," he began, his voice calm but firm, "this document is not what it appears to be. On the surface, it's a simple purchase agreement. But the devil, as they say, is in the details." He slid the document across the polished surface of the desk and pointed to a dense paragraph on the 3rd page. "Look at this clause here. It's a broadly worded power of attorney embedded within the sales contract. It's predatory, and it's designed to look like standard boilerplate language to a layman." He let that sink in for a moment. "If you sign this, Richard, you are not just agreeing to a future sale of your home. You are immediately at the moment the ink dries granting Kevin the absolute legal authority to act on your behalf in all matters concerning this property. He could take out a second mortgage on it tomorrow morning. He could change the terms of the sale, lower the price, sell it to one of his own shell corporations for $1. You would have no legal recourse. You would be handing him the keys to your entire life's investment, with no strings attached." He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in protest. "As your friend," he said, his voice softening slightly, "I'm telling you that this is one of the most ruthless things I have ever seen a child do to a parent. As your lawyer, I am advising you in the strongest possible terms. Do not under any circumstances let your pen touch this document. It is a loaded gun pointed directly at your financial security." I listened to his words, and I felt no surprise. I felt nothing but a cold, heavy confirmation of what my gut had already told me. I had not come here for advice on whether to sign. I had come here to confirm the caliber of the bullet. I looked at David, my friend of 40 years, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I know David," I said, my voice steady. "I never intended to sign it." David looked genuinely confused. He gestured towards the offensive document on his desk. "Then why bring it to me? Why go through this charade with Kevin? Why not just tell him no and throw him out of your house?" "Because no is not enough," I replied, leaning forward slightly in my chair. "A simple no ends the conversation. It allows him to retreat, to come up with another plan, another angle of attack. I don't want to end this conversation, David. I want to see it through to its conclusion. I want to see exactly how far my son is willing to go. I am going to let him believe he is winning. I am going to let him push. I will let him make his phone calls and arrange his meetings, and I am going to quietly document every single step he takes." The look on David's face shifted from confusion to a dawning, sober understanding. He saw that the grieving man who had called him 2 nights ago was gone. In his place was a client with a very clear, very cold objective. "And while he is busy trying to take the house from me," I continued, my voice dropping lower, "you and I are going to ensure that the house is no longer mine to give." This time David was genuinely shocked. "What are you talking about, Richard?" "I want you to begin the process of placing the house into an irrevocable trust," I said. "Effective immediately. I want it done quietly, and I want it done quickly. The sole beneficiary of this trust will be a new charitable foundation. We will call it the Clara Cole Foundation." David stared at me speechless for a moment. "An irrevocable trust," he finally managed to say. "Richard, you understand what that means, don't you? Once this is done, it's done. You cannot undo it. You would no longer own your home. Legally speaking, it would be gone. Clara spent her life building that home, I said, my gaze unwavering. Its purpose was always to provide love, shelter, and security. The foundation will ensure that it continues to do exactly that for people who truly need it. It will be her legacy, a legacy of giving, not of taking. I stood up from my chair, the decision now as solid as the oak desk between us. Get the paperwork started, David, and keep this between us. Utmost confidentiality. My son is about to get a very expensive lesson in the true meaning of inheritance. The days following my meeting with David were quiet. I let Kevin's emails go unanswered and his calls go to voicemail. He was growing impatient, I could tell from the increasingly urgent tone of his messages, but I needed this time. I needed the silence. David had called to let me know the initial paperwork for the trust was underway, but he needed more information: property tax records, maintenance invoices, a clear accounting of the estate. It was the perfect excuse to do something I had been dreading, to go through Clara's office. Her office, which was really just a small sunlit room at the back of the house, had been left untouched since she passed. It was her sanctuary, and it felt like a violation to disturb it. But now I had a purpose. This wasn't about grieving. It was about protecting her legacy. I pushed open the door and was met with the faint, familiar scent of her rose-scented stationery. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light. It was a room frozen in time. In the corner next to her old wooden desk was a stack of simple cardboard banker's boxes. Her elegant looping handwriting was on the side of each one. Gardening, photos, and the one I was looking for, medical 2023-2025. I carried the box to the large dining room table and lifted the lid. It was filled to the brim with a chaotic blizzard of paper. The sheer volume of it was a testament to the long, brutal war she had fought against her illness. There were hospital invoices, pharmacy receipts, lab results, and thick, complicated explanation of benefits statements from the insurance company. It was the bureaucratic footprint of a life in its final, painful chapter. My first task was simply to bring order to this chaos. The old accountant in me took over. I created neat piles on the table, my movements slow and methodical. This pile for insurance statements, this one for hospital bills, this for prescriptions. For a few hours, I lost myself in the work. It was comforting in a strange way. Each piece of paper was a small, painful memory. A receipt for a powerful painkiller reminded me of a particularly bad week in January. An invoice for an ambulance ride brought back the raw, helpless fear of that night. But by organizing them, by putting them into their proper categories, I felt like I was taming the memories, putting them into a context I could manage. My goal was simple: to create a clear record for the trust. I wasn't looking for anything. I was simply closing the books. After sorting all the bills, I turned to the final stack, the bank statements from our joint savings account, the one we used for all major expenses. My plan was to cross-reference the withdrawals with the invoices to make sure everything was accounted for. I started with the statement from 2 years ago. I scanned the columns of debits and credits, my finger tracing the lines of familiar transactions. The mortgage payment, the property taxes, the insurance premiums. Then a line item caught my eye. Cash withdrawal counter transaction, $5,000. I paused. $5,000 was a large amount of cash. I tried to remember what it could have been for. An emergency repair, perhaps. The water heater had failed around that time. I made a mental note and moved on. I picked up the next month's statement, and there it was again. Second business day of the month. Cash withdrawal counter transaction, $5,000. A cold knot began to form in the pit of my stomach. This was no longer a forgotten expense. This was a pattern. I abandoned my neat piles and spread all 24 bank statements across the dining room table, laying them out in chronological order like a grim timeline. The pattern was undeniable, unmistakable. On the first or second business day of almost every month, for the last 2 years of Clara's life, A cash withdrawal of exactly $5,000 was made from our account. My breath caught in my throat. I stood up and walked to my study, returning with my old heavy-duty calculator, the one I had used for 40 years at my firm. The plastic keys felt cool and familiar under my fingers. I sat back down at the table and began to add up the withdrawals. The soft click-clack of the buttons was the only sound in the silent house. Click. 5,000. Click. 10,000. Click. 15. My hand felt heavy as I punched in the numbers, my mind racing. The total grew month by month, a rising tide of red ink. When I finally hit the total button, the number that appeared on the small digital screen made me feel dizzy. $285,000. It couldn't be right. I cleared the calculator and did it again, my movements more frantic this time. The result was the same. Over $250,000 withdrawn in cash over 24 months. My mind reeled, trying to find a logical explanation. Had Clara been paying for some experimental treatment, something she had hidden from me to keep me from worrying? I frantically turned back to the mountain of medical bills, my eyes scanning for any invoice, any receipt, any clue that could account for such a massive expenditure. There was nothing. Our insurance had been excellent. It had covered the surgeries, the chemotherapy, the long hospital stays. Our total out-of-pocket costs, all carefully documented, were less than $20,000 over that entire period. The numbers didn't lie, but they didn't make sense. I sat there, surrounded by the paper trail of my wife's final years, and stared at that impossible number. A new, more terrible possibility began to form in my mind, a suspicion so ugly I could barely allow myself to think it. The betrayal I felt over the missed funeral suddenly seemed small, almost insignificant. This was something else entirely. This was a different kind of monster. This wasn't just disrespect. This was a systematic theft, a cold and calculated plundering of a dying woman's savings. I looked at the neat columns on the bank statements, and I no longer saw just numbers. I saw a crime scene. And the central question was no longer about my son's heartlessness. It was about his criminality. Where I asked the silent room, did all that money go, I sat at the dining room table for what felt like hours, the bank statements spread out before me like a map of a foreign and hostile land. The numbers didn't change no matter how many times I stared at them. $285,000. A fortune vanished into thin air. I knew I couldn't find the answer in those columns of black and white. There was only one person left who might know something, one person Clara might have confided in. The thought of making the call felt like a betrayal of Clara's privacy, like I was prying into a part of her life she had kept from me. But the need to know the truth was a physical ache, a weight that was becoming too heavy to bear. With a heavy hand, I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Sarah Jenkins. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and kind as it always was. "Richard, how are you doing, dear? I was just thinking of you." "I'm managing, Sarah. Thank you for asking," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, the sad, gentle conversation of old friends navigating a shared loss. She asked if I was eating properly, if I was getting any sleep. I assured her I was fine. Then I took a breath and steered the conversation towards the real reason for my call. "Sarah?" I began, trying to sound like a merely confused husband, not a man on the verge of a terrible discovery. "I've been going through some of Clara's old papers for the estate and, well, to be honest, I'm a bit lost. I was so focused on her care during those last couple of years, I'm afraid I lost track of the finances. I found some things I don't quite understand. I was just wondering, did she ever mention anything to you? Any unusual expenses or financial worries she might not have wanted to burden me with?" The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and profound. It wasn't the silence of someone thinking. It was the silence of someone deciding. Deciding whether to keep a promise made to the dead or to tell a truth owed to the living. When she finally spoke, her voice was a near whisper, heavy with a sadness that went beyond grief. "Oh, Richard," she said, and I could hear the pain in her words. "I'm so sorry." She made me promise not to say anything. She loved you so much, you see. She saw how exhausted you were taking care of her day and night. The last thing in the world she wanted was to give you one more thing to worry about. Worry about what, Sarah? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. What was she worried about? Sarah took a shaky breath. It was Kevin, she said softly. She told me Kevin was helping her with the bills. A mother's love, Richard. It can be so very blind. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat in my chest. He told her there were experimental treatments. Sarah continued, her voice cracking. Specialists from Europe, new therapies from private clinics that weren't covered by insurance. He told her they were her best hope, maybe her only hope. But he said they had to be paid for in cash to avoid regulations and get the medicine faster. He made it all sound so urgent, so secret. He was saving his mother's life. Every word struck me like a physical blow. I could picture it perfectly. My son, with his smooth voice and confident smile, spinning a web of lies around his own dying mother. He hadn't just stolen her money. He had stolen her hope, packaged it, and sold it back to her at an exorbitant price. She believed him, Richard, Sarah said, her voice now thick with tears. Of course she believed him. He was her son, and she was so desperate for more time, even just one more season in her garden. She would have given him anything if she thought it would buy her one more sunrise. She gave him the money in cash every month. She thought she was fighting for her life. I couldn't speak. A wave of cold fury washed over me, so intense it left me breathless. I was no longer the grieving husband. I was the silent witness to a crime so cruel, so intimate, it defied comprehension. Thank you, Sarah, I managed to say, my voice a choked, unrecognizable rasp. You've told me what I needed to know. I ended the call without another word and let the phone slip from my grasp. It clattered onto the table, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. My hand was trembling, not from age or from grief, but from a rage so pure and so deep it felt like ice flowing through my veins. The man who had refused to honor his mother in her death had also been robbing her in her life. He hadn't just skipped her funeral to attend a party. He had funded that party and his entire life with the money his mother had given him in the desperate, loving belief that he was saving her. The truth was infinitely worse than I could have ever imagined. He didn't just take her money. He took her hope. He sold it back to her piece by piece for $5,000 a month. Several days passed. The bank statements and Clara's meticulously organized medical bills now sat in a neat labeled folder in my study. They were no longer just papers. They were the components of a meticulously constructed trap. The rage I had felt after my call with Sarah had cooled, settling into a state of diamond-hard clarity. Grief was a fog, but this was a lens focusing all my energy onto a single point. I had the evidence. I understood the crime. Now it was time to summon the accused. I sat at my desk, looked at a small framed photograph of Clara and me on our wedding day, and drew strength from her smile. This was for her. I picked up the phone and dialed my son's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice clipped and impatient. Dad, I've been calling. I've left you 5 messages. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting a hint of a weary sigh travel down the line. It was time for my performance to begin. My voice when I spoke was nothing like the cold, efficient tone I had used with David Chen. I made it sound frayed, tired, the voice of a man worn down by grief and loneliness. I know, Kevin. I'm sorry. It's been a difficult time. I just needed a few days to myself. Yeah, well, the buyers aren't going to wait forever, Dad. He snapped back, all business. I know, I said, letting my voice crack just a little. I know. That's why I'm calling. I paused, as if gathering the strength to say the words. I've been doing a lot of thinking since you were here. I've been walking through this empty house and maybe you're right." There was a moment of surprised silence on his end of the line. I had his full attention. "This house," I continued, my voice laced with a carefully crafted melancholy. "It's too much for one person. It's full of ghosts. Every corner I turn, I expect to see her. Maybe it is time to let go. Maybe you're right." The relief in his voice was immediate and palpable, a sudden exhalation of breath. "Dad," he said, his tone instantly shifting from aggressive to soothing. "I knew you'd come around. It's the logical choice, the right choice." "Perhaps," I said softly. "But there's one thing I need to do first. It's not about logic, Kevin. It's for your mother." I let the emotion hang in the air. This was the hook baited with the one thing he always underestimated: sentiment. This house was her life's work. It was her legacy. The thought of it just being sold off, turned into numbers on a spreadsheet. I can't do it. Not like that. "Dad, what are you talking about?" he asked, a hint of suspicion creeping back into his voice. "Before I sign anything," I said, my voice firming slightly, as if stating a non-negotiable term of surrender. "I need to meet your partners, your investors. I need to look them in the eye and hear about this project myself. I need to see the plans, understand the vision. I need to be sure that what your mother poured her soul into is going towards building something worthy of her memory. It's the only way I can have peace with this son. It's the only way I can sign." The silence on the other end was a different kind this time. It was the sound of a predator processing a sudden, unexpected victory. He didn't hear a demand. He heard a ceremony. He didn't hear a condition. He heard a final sentimental request from a broken old man who needed his last moments of dignity. It appealed directly to his vanity. "Dad," he finally exclaimed, his voice booming with triumphant joy. That's great news, I completely understand. Of course, that's a fantastic idea. My partners will be absolutely thrilled to meet you." The condescending reassurances came pouring out, a flood of self-satisfaction. "These guys are top-tier, Dad. The best in the business. They'll love this. The story of the house, the family legacy. It adds to the whole narrative of the project. It shows we're building on a foundation of history and quality." He was so blind, so wrapped up in his own ego, that he couldn't hear the crushing irony in his own words. He thought I was there to bless his project. He had no idea I was coming to bury it. "We'll do it at my office," he continued, his voice swelling with pride. "You can see the whole operation I've built. We'll use the main conference room. It has a great view of the city. Just say the word, Dad. I will clear their schedules for you. Anything." I let him finish, savoring the sound of his complete and utter self-deception. He had not only taken the bait, he had swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. He was now eagerly leading me to the very place where I would pass my judgment. "Friday," I said, my voice quiet and resigned. "Friday at 10 o'clock would be fine." "Perfect. I'll have my assistant send you the details." "Dad, thank you. You're doing the right thing." "I hope so, Kevin," I said. "I truly do." I ended the call and placed the phone back on its cradle. The performance was over. I sat in the profound silence of my study, the mask of the weary, grieving father falling away from my face. It was replaced by the cold, patient expression of a hunter who had just heard the distinct click of a trap being sprung. The day before the meeting was unnervingly calm. The frantic energy of discovery and the cold anger of revelation had subsided, leaving behind a profound and steady sense of purpose. I was not nervous. A man about to do a necessary, albeit unpleasant job has no room for nerves. Every action I took that day was deliberate, a series of final, quiet moves on a chessboard my son didn't know he was playing on. My first stop was the bank. It was the same local branch Clara and I had used for nearly 50 years, The cool marble floors and the quiet, respectable hum of commerce were a familiar comfort. I bypassed the tellers and walked directly to the office of the branch manager, a kind and competent woman named Mrs. Gable, who had known our family for decades. She greeted me with a sad, sympathetic smile and offered her condolences once more. "Richard, it's good to see you, though. I wish it were under better circumstances," she said gently. "Anything you need, you just have to ask." "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, taking the seat opposite her polished desk. "I do need something. It's a bit unusual. I need certified copies of the last 24 months of statements for my joint savings account." I pushed a piece of paper across the desk where I had written down the account number. "And I need something specific. For every cash withdrawal over $1,000, I need the transaction highlighted, and I need each and every page to be stamped with an official bank seal." She raised an eyebrow slightly, the professional in her recognizing this as a request for something more than simple record-keeping. This was a request for evidence. She didn't ask any questions, however. She simply nodded. "Of course, Richard. It will take a little while to prepare. Please have a coffee." An hour later, I walked out of the bank. In my briefcase was not a thin stack of printouts, but a heavy sealed manila envelope. Inside were the certified statements, each page bearing the weight of the bank's authority. The highlighted lines of $5,000 withdrawals were like a repeating, damning chorus in a tragic song. The weight of the envelope in my hand felt substantial, real. It was the weight of truth. My second stop was David Chen's office. The air in his conference room was solemn, the finality of our purpose hanging between us. On the large mahogany table lay a thick stack of documents bound in a dark blue cover. The title in elegant gold lettering read, "The Clara Cole Foundation Trust Agreement." David had been true to his word. He had worked quickly and quietly. He walked me through the key provisions one last time, his lawyer's voice steady and clear, ensuring I understood the gravity of each clause. He explained the legal meaning of irrevocable, the permanent transfer of ownership, the duties of the appointed trustee. I listened patiently, though I already knew. I had made my peace with this decision days ago. "The Foundation's stated purpose," David read aloud, "is to provide financial grants and respite care services for families in this county who are acting as primary caregivers for a loved one with a terminal illness." He looked up at me. "It's a beautiful tribute, Richard." "It's what she would have wanted," I said softly. He pushed the final signature page towards me and handed me a heavy black fountain pen. The same pen I had used to sign my marriage license with Clara 50 years earlier. I took it in my hand. Its weight was familiar, comforting. I looked down at the line waiting for my name. This was the true signature Kevin had been after. Not one that would liquidate a legacy, but one that would cement it forever. My hand did not tremble. I signed my name, Richard Cole, the script firm and clear. It was the signature of a man closing the most important account of his life. With that single motion, the house I had called home for 40 years was no longer mine. It now belonged to the memory of my wife, and to all the families who would one day find comfort because of her. After the documents were signed and notarized, David leaned back in his chair. He steepled his fingers and looked at me, his expression shifting from that of a lawyer to that of a concerned friend. He had one last question. "It's done, Richard," he said, his voice quiet. "There is no going back. As of this moment, that house is the legal property of the Foundation. Tomorrow you will walk into that meeting with your son. Are you absolutely certain about this? About everything?" He was giving me one last chance to walk away from the confrontation, to simply let the quiet legal victory be enough. I didn't answer right away. I rose from my chair and walked to the large window that overlooked the city below. Cars and people moved like a silent, purposeful river, each on their own journey, each with their own stories. When I was a young man just starting out as a junior accountant, I began my voice calm and reflective. My first mentor taught me something I never forgot. He said our job wasn't just about balancing the numbers on a page. He said our real job was to be guardians, to protect the integrity of the system, whether that system was a multinational corporation or a small family business, to protect it from the cancer of fraud, waste, and deceit. I turned back from the window to look my old friend in the eye. For the last 2 years, David, a cancer has been growing in my family. It's been feeding on love, on trust, and on the quiet desperation of a dying woman. Tomorrow, I am not going to that meeting to destroy my son. I am going there to perform a necessary surgery. I am going to win out the disease so that the name Cole can once again stand for something honorable. I walked back to the table and picked up my briefcase. It now contained both the sealed envelope from the bank and a certified copy of the newly executed trust. It was heavier now, not just with paper, but with purpose. Clara spent her entire life protecting our family from the threats that existed outside the walls of our home. I said, my hand resting on the briefcase. I'm simply finishing her work. I'm protecting it from the threat that was already inside. I walked into the conference room at precisely 10 o'clock. It was exactly as I had pictured it, a temple of glass and steel built on the foundation shock of my son's ambition. A panoramic window displayed the city skyline like a conquered territory. In the center of the room was a long, polished mahogany table so reflective you could see your own distorted face in it. Kevin sat at its head looking every bit the triumphant CEO. Tiffany was seated to his right, radiant in a silk blouse playing the part of the supportive corporate wife. Opposite them were 2 men in expensive, sharply tailored suits. They had the relaxed, predatory smiles of men who ate Risk for breakfast. The air in the room was thick with self-satisfaction. Kevin stood as I entered, his smile wide and magnanimous. It was the smile of a man who believed he had already won. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming with false sincerity. "This is my father, Richard Cole. Dad. I'd like you to meet Mr. Albright and Mr. Sterling, my partners in the new venture." The 2 men rose and shook my hand, their grips firm and their eyes cold. They saw what Kevin wanted them to see, a sentimental old man, a relic from a bygone era here to give his ceremonial blessing before being put out to pasture. I was a quaint piece of the project's origin story. "It's a pleasure to meet the man who started it all," Mr. Albright said smoothly. I simply nodded and took the seat Kevin indicated directly opposite him. My old leather briefcase felt out of place on the gleaming modern table. Kevin let the pleasantries hang in the air for a moment before getting down to business. He slid the thick leather-bound sales contract across the table. It glided over the polished surface, coming to a stop directly in front of me. "Here you go, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with condescending patience. "Just as we discussed. We've got the notary waiting outside. Once you sign, we can toast to the future." He leaned back in his chair, a king in his court, waiting for his final tribute. I let my eyes rest on the contract for a long moment. Then I looked up and met my son's gaze. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I placed my own briefcase on the table and opened it with 2 quiet, decisive clicks. "I won't be signing that," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room's smug atmosphere like a shard of glass. Kevin's smile faltered. "What, Dad? What are you talking about?" "We had an agreement." "No, Kevin," I replied calmly. "You had an expectation." I pulled out the first document, a simple, dignified folder bound in blue. I placed it in the center of the table. "I will not be signing your contract, because as of 9 a.m. yesterday morning, I ceased to be the legal owner of that property." The change in the room was instantaneous. Kevin's face went from confusion to disbelief. Tiffany's practiced smile froze on her face. The 2 investors exchanged a quick, sharp glance. "The house," I continued, my voice even and clear, "was placed into an irrevocable trust. It is now the sole asset of a new charitable organization, the Clara Cole Foundation. Its mission will be to provide financial support and respite care for families who are caring for a terminally ill loved one. The house is not for sale. It will never be for sale. You can't do that, Kevin stammered, his face beginning to pale. It's already done, I said. Before he could process the full impact of his lost inheritance, I reached back into my briefcase. But that, I said, my voice hardening, is not the real reason I am here. I pulled out the heavy sealed envelope from the bank and placed it on the table with a definitive thud. I opened the clasp and slid the contents across the polished wood towards him. Certified copies of 24 months of bank statements. The neat highlighted columns of $5,000 withdrawals were impossible to ignore. The investors, their professional curiosity now fully engaged, leaned forward to look. $285,000, Kevin, I said, my voice dropping into a cold, quiet register. Withdrawn in cash from your mother's savings over the last 2 years of her life. You told her it was for experimental medicine. You told her it was to save her life. But the medical bills show that insurance paid for almost everything. So I have a question for you, son. A question I'd like you to answer in front of your partners. Where did your mother's money go? The color drained completely from Tiffany's face. She stared at her husband, her mouth slightly agape, a mask of dawning horror. Mr. Albright and Mr. Sterling slowly, deliberately began to push their chairs back from the table, their expressions now arctic. They were creating distance, disassociating themselves from the toxic fallout that was rapidly filling the room. Kevin was speechless, his face a ghastly shade of white, his eyes wide with the terror of a man whose world was collapsing in on him. This was the moment. I stood up, asserting my final and total authority in the room. I reached into my briefcase one last time. You came to my house with a request, I said, my voice like ice. Now I have a request for you. I placed a single sheet of paper down in front of my son, directly on top of the damning bank statements. This document is a legally binding confession and a repayment agreement. I stated, my eyes locked on his. You will agree to repay the full $285,000 to the Clara Cole Foundation with interest over a period of 12 months. If you sign it, I will consider this a private family matter, a debt to be paid. I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle. If you do not sign it, I said, tapping the folder that contained the evidence, then this entire file, along with a sworn affidavit from me and a formal statement from Sarah Jenkins, will be hand-delivered to the district attorney's office tomorrow morning. The charge will be financial elder abuse, a felony. I looked at him, my son, a man I no longer recognized, a hollowed-out shell of greed and deceit. He was broken. I had no more words for him. My work here was done. I turned away from the wreckage of his life and walked towards the door, my back straight. I did not need to hear his answer. The choice was his, but his future was already gone. I left the chaos behind me, the hurried whispers of the departing investors, the silent accusatory tears starting to stream down Tiffany's face, and my son, utterly destroyed, left alone to stare at the 2 documents that represented the ruin of his life. I stepped out of the room and closed the door softly behind me, leaving the chill of justice in my wake. I had not gotten revenge. I had simply finally balanced the books. I have learned that a true legacy is not written in a will, but in the values we protect. My son saw our home as an asset to be liquidated. I saw it as the library of a life his mother built. By choosing to honor that life over his greed, I discovered that justice is not about loud revenge, but the quiet, firm act of setting a ledger straight. The most valuable inheritance we can leave is the integrity of our name, a foundation that can never be sold or stolen, and a lesson that the quietest man can deliver the loudest truth. If you believe that a true legacy is worth more than money, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing for the next story.